Of the Religious Freedom Annual Review. For those of you who are with us this morning, you may recall that I began with the rhetorical question of whether things are better or worse than they seem, and expressed the hope that at the end of the day we could have a sense that things are better than they seem, and that we would feel empowered and uplifted to go forth and make a difference in our circles and our places of influence. And I don't use this word very often, but at the end of the day, it would be fair to say that I am giddy. I am so pleased with the tenor of the conversation, the things we've heard, the things we've learned, the voices, the variety. It's been just a smorgasbord of just insight and inspiration. And I want to end where I began, with an expression of gratitude to all of our speakers who've traveled from a distance to be here with us. And we've saved the best for last. I'm so grateful that tonight we have with us Elder Quentin L. Cook of the Quorum of 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's one of my heroes, and he may not remember this, but I taught his son business associations in about my first year as a law professor.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say that his son has not yet been disbarred. So I'm pretty sure I was committing educational malpractice as a first-year professor, but I'm happy to say that Larry has endured even my teaching. I'd like to begin just by reading a short quote from Elder Cook, and then turning the floor to him, and he will introduce the panelists. And when they finish, they have a press conference scheduled. So we'll ask, after Elder Cook completes and concludes the session, just to stand or sit for a few minutes while they're able to get to their next appointment. Their schedule's a little tight this evening. Elder Cook had this to say, speaking at Notre Dame University on religious freedom on January 28th, 2001. We have to have the faith. We have to have the freedom to live in accordance with our faith. And those who are of no faith at the same time have to have the freedom to live in accordance with their conscience. We have to rouse the sleeping giant. That's what we're here to do this evening. Elder Cook, over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm grateful to moderate this panel, which consists of members of the Commission of Religious Leaders for the City of New York. You've heard some of that group in a previous panel, and I understand they did exceptionally well, and so we're grateful to have this continuing. This panel will explore how people of diverse faiths benefit communities, both through religious accountability and the practical services and social contributions that religions facilitate and encourage. The members of tonight's panel include, from left to right, Reverend Dr. A.R. Bernard Sr. Reverend Bernard is the founder, CEO, and senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center, Brooklyn, New York. And he's the president of the Commission of Religious Leaders of New York. All of these are on that commission. Reverend Bernard has collaborated with national and global faith leaders that advocate for religious freedom. Reverend Bernard is the co-host of the radio program, The Rev and the Rabbi. Now, I wondered how, and I'm going to introduce Rabbi Potasnik in a bit here. I wondered how the Rev got his name in front of the Rabbi, because the Rabbi's been doing this for a very long time, but he says in Hebrew you read from left to right, and so right to left. Thank you, Rabbi Gerson. I need some help on it. So either way you look at it, it comes out that way. But he's an author. He's launched ARBTV. He's a digital platform featuring diverse topics. and the former president of the Council of Churches of the City of New York. We could spend our whole time tonight going through everything that each one of them have done, so I'm just choosing a few. Rabbi Potasnik is the executive vice president of the New York Board of Rabbis, the largest interdenominational rabbinic body in the world. He is vice president of the Commission of Religious Leaders of New York. His efforts on behalf of first responders following the events of September 11, 2001 have endeared him to people of all faiths. He is honorary president of Religions for Peace International. Other esteemed members of the commission are Reverend Q. English. I have a lot of fun with her middle name is Q, Q-U-E. And of course, my first name is Quentin, but my grandchildren call me Grandpa Q. And so she's Reverend Q, and I'm Grandpa Q, and that's kind of how we see that. Reverend English has served as the director of the Partnership Center of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services since 2021, heralded as one of the top 25 women leaders in Bronx, New York. Reverend English's passion is to empower, train, and educate houses of worship to serve as community bridge builders and to establish much-needed strategic partnerships in their neighborhoods and cities. She is the chair of the New York City Faith-Based Coalition Against Human Trafficking and Domestic Violence and co-founder of the Bronx Clergy Roundtable. We're just so pleased to have Reverend Q with us here as well. We're pleased to have Elder Buckner, and I didn't mention a lot of degrees for anybody else, but I thought if you actually have a BYU law graduate and you don't mention that, you could get in big trouble. So Elder Buckner received a Juris Doctorate degree from BYU, J. Reuben Clark Law School, and is an adjunct faculty professor at Columbia University and president of Bottom Line Training and Consulting, Inc. He is currently serving as an Area 70 in the North America Northeast area and a member of the Commission of Religious Leaders of New York. So we're very happy to have all four of these, this panel, and we'll get to asking them questions in a few minutes. But before I ask questions, I want to lay just a little foundation to set the stage. New York City, in many ways, is an example of the religious diversity that exists in this country. The United States is a land of immigrants. Many have immigrated here to escape persecution, including Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and others. There is a strong tradition with historical constitutional underpinnings to protect fundamental religious rights. This has been a great blessing in this country and has been recognized from the country's founding. For our panel tonight, I want to emphasize two of the benefits of religious freedom. The first is the way religious accountability benefits secular society. The second is the multitude of good works that religion inspires people of faith to perform on behalf of others. Regarding the first, the role of religion in blessing a secular society, this was set forth succinctly by Alexis de Tocqueville in his 1840 classic, Democracy in America. Reverend Bernard started quoting de Tocqueville to me almost after he got off the plane yesterday, so he loves de Tocqueville as well. He stated, "The greatest advantage of religion is to inspire principles. There is no religion which does not place the object of man's desire above and beyond the treasure of earth, and which does not naturally raise his soul to regions far above those of the senses. Nor is there any which does not impose on man some sort of duties to his kind, and thus draws him at times from the contemplation of himself." End quote. Accountability to God for our relationships with each other is a powerful force for good and strongly supports democracy. Being accountable sustains and blesses the values that are most important for societal unity. The late Dr. Clayton Christensen, a renowned Harvard business professor, a dear friend, and a member of my faith who passed away 2 years ago, was known as a valiant supporter of religious freedom. He believed that religious freedom contributed to democracy and following the law. Let me share a brief video featuring Dr. Christensen.
Some time ago, I had a conversation with a Marxist economist from China. He was coming to the end of a Fulbright fellowship here in Boston, and I asked him if he had learned anything that was surprising or unexpected. And without any hesitation, he said, yeah. I had no idea how critical religion is to the functioning of democracy. The reason why democracy works, he said, is not because the government was designed to oversee what everybody does, but rather democracy works because most people, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the law. And in your past, most Americans attended a church or a synagogue every week, and they were taught there by people who they respected. My friend went on to say that Americans followed these rules because they had come to believe that they weren't just accountable to society, they were accountable to God. My Chinese friend heightened a vague but nagging concern I've harbored inside that as religion loses its influence over the lives of Americans, what will happen to our democracy? Where are the institutions that are going to teach the next generation of Americans that they too need to voluntarily choose to obey the laws? Because if you take away religion, you can't hire enough police.
Reverend Dr. Bernard, tell us about the Commission of Religious Leaders of New York City, which we will refer to as CORL, C-O-R-L, that's what you all refer to it, Commission of Religious Leaders. How was it formed? How does it contribute to New York City today?
Well, beginning from left to right, Rabbi?
Well, I do think that the Old Testament should precede the New Testament, so I thank you for that respect. Firstly, I want to say to all of you, especially those of you from the church, leaders, members, I am so in awe of your organizational skills, the way you've put these programs together and include all of us. And I say that because when I first began as a rabbi, I had to find a quorum, because we have a quorum also. We need 10 people for a prayer service. My first congregation in Brooklyn, we wanted to have the service. We had 9 people there. So I went out into the street. Someone walks by and I said, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Could you come and be part of the quorum, make the minyan, as we say?" He said, "Sir, I don't believe in organized religion." I said, "Sir, if we were organized, would I be standing on the street stopping people?" So thank you all for that. And President Wortham, I'm a graduate of Yeshiva University. For you to put the Y on the mountain in honor of my school, I really think is so deserving of recognition.
Oh my God, this is good.
Let me say to all of you here, Coral was founded years ago in the 50s. I remember Coral being in existence during the administration of John Lindsay, mayor of New York. And the reason was because we recognized the interface between religion and government. As a matter of fact, when we start a meeting, the cardinal begins with a prayer from the book of Psalms. And it says, God is in the midst of the city. When Abraham pleaded with God not to destroy the cities, he said, if there are righteous people, good people in the midst of a city, will you still destroy them? And God said no. So you see from the very origin that religion belongs in the city. When I was growing up in Massachusetts, I would see a house of worship contiguous to a courthouse. And the reason for that, visual was to remind all of us that what we see in one place, or what we say in one place, we have to see in the other place. It's not enough to pray for peace. We have to pursue it, as we say in Jewish tradition. So Choral is a body of faith leaders of all different denominations, and now including Elder Buckner of the church. And what we say is, hear our voice as well. We listen to you, but you listen to us. The middle letter of the Torah, of the Bible, is a Vav, which is a connector. It means and. And maybe that's the most important letter of the Bible, because it connects what precedes and what comes after. What we say is the only way we're going to address these challenges is I and you, we and you. We have to do this together. These are problems that challenge all of us. These are problems that must be addressed by all of us. We are not apart from society. We are a part of society.
Great answer.
Amen. If religion is what I've experienced, in the last 2 days that I've been here, is this working?
Yes, we're now hearing
The
you.
last 2 days that I've been here?
Mike.
Yeah. Testing one? Okay, good. Going in and out. Okay. I think they gave me your mic, Rabbi Gerson.
They're ecumenical.
I think so. But if religion is what I've experienced in the last 2 days here in Salt Lake City, then we definitely need more of it. You have been gracious, hospitable, generous, and it's wonderful that we can have conversations that transcend any doctrine, nuances in theology towards the common good. So thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for honoring us the way you have in bringing us here. Throughout history, throughout cultures around the world, there have been three systems that function within society: the political system, government; the economic system, business; and the moral system. And the pillar of the moral system, besides education, are our religious institutions. We are the conscience, the voice of conscience within the soul of a society. We urge government and business to measure their judgments as they legitimize power, distribute power, validate power, produce goods and services, pursue self-interest. We urge them with a very strong and powerful moral voice to measure those judgments, those decisions, according to God's perspective on the nature and ordering of society. Because that's what is in contention here. Culture is essentially our attempt to order society and determine the best ways to live in it. And we've got some ideas that are unproven, untested. And yet we have ideas that have been proven and tested by the Creator, and they work best for us. So we play a very important role in society. The Commission of Religious Leaders has allowed us to come together and use that prophetic voice, that moral voice, that humanitarian voice, that redemptive voice, and bring it into play into what's happening within our city.
Yes.
I could add something. Bishop Victor Brown is a member of the Commission of Religious Leaders sitting in the front row here. The commission was reconvened after the Eric Garner case. Tragic story. Man who, perpetrated really a minor crime, selling Lucy's individual cigarettes, and was choked to death by a member of the police. That issue had the potential of exploding in New York City. Bishop Brown brought together police and the Garner family in a house of worship on Staten Island. We brought together all of the religious leaders to stand in solidarity. And we said, this is our city, this is our problem, and we cannot find a constructive conclusion unless we all speak with one another. And thanks to your efforts and the efforts of Choral and faith leaders who said that, you know, when we pray for peace, peace is incomplete unless we pray for peace for one another. I can't just say, I want peace for my people and ignore someone else's people. So that to me was a manifestation of the importance of the religious bodies that had a very, very positive impact upon what could have been a disaster in the city. So thank you, and thank you, Coral.
Thank you. Reverend English, thank you. I told, can you imagine having the name Bishop Victor Brown in an LDS community? He was the presiding bishop in our church when I was young. So, Reverend English, give us a little bit of your perspective on choral. What would you like to add to anything that's been said?
You know, right before I say that, I have to say these past 2 days have been so impactful for me. When we think about compassion in action, LDS represents just that. And everywhere we find Jesus operating in Scripture, where he was moved with compassion, it followed with action. And when I looked at the model that has been created here, where you look at the injustices and you're moved with compassion and you act. Compassion being empathy and action. So I just want to applaud you, LDS, for the work that you're doing on behalf of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's been so many.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Do you want me to
No, you
talk
go
about
ahead.
Coral? Yeah. I just want to give you an example of how we approach some of the injustices that we face together on a unified front. There was a time in New York where there was a lot of chatter about the legalization of prostitution. Already we were seeing an increase in human trafficking, and the very thought of legalizing prostitution was heart-wrenching. Knowing that in every country that has legalized it, they have failed. We've seen an increase in violence, a decrease in the age of trafficked victims, and legal brothels becoming places where our children were trafficked. And so to that end, being able to come to Coral and these powerful influencers at the table, powerful in their own right, in their own place of silo, but making a decision that we're going to tackle these injustices together, because if it pains the heart of God, surely it pains our heart too. But it doesn't just pain us to inaction, it pained us to action. And so while there was deliberation in Albany around this issue, where the thought of seeing legal brothels throughout our city, where our children now have an option to choose prostitution as a trade, I believe we all declared together, not on my watch. And so to that end, we drafted a letter to the governor. Everyone signed it. And while we weren't the only voice influencing the halt, it did stop movement. Why? Because we made a decision together as rabbis, as reverend, LDS, coming together as one voice, which could not be ignored by government, to create that letter, to create the halting of seeing that atrocious bill pass. So, Elder Cook, that's just one example of many that we have embraced in Coral, using our influence for good. and not looking at religion, I don't even see religion. I don't want to talk. He's gonna have something to say if I say this. But he is my brother. David's my brother. We don't even see religion. It's not about religion. It's about the needs of humanity and what we need to do together to address it.
Thank you. Elder Buckner, what impact have you seen Choral have? You're one of the newer members. You've observed it very carefully. How would you describe that?
It's interesting to come with a new lens. This has a great legacy and a long history. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very small, comparatively. When you think about the number of congregations that exist in New York, in a very complex city where voices can be smothered out. And it was interesting because when we were invited, and it was really at the advocacy of these three and others that sat at the table and said that people should be included, voices should be heard, and different lenses should be included, that it became quite remarkable because that very first day I sat at the table, I walked in, Cardinal Dolan, who presides there at that table, invited me to sit right by him, immediately introducing me, and then almost as if it were choreographed, which it wasn't. We were family. And in that inclusion, that element of inclusion, you felt very much like a city that came with different voices. And I remember Reverend Al Sharpton was there at the time, and we were talking about, I think Commissioner Shea was coming in, the police commissioner. We were talking about some pretty complex issues. This was new to me. This was a big complex moment. And I remember Reverend Al Sharpton saying something to the effect that, Elder Buckner, we might be in different ships, but we are in the same storm. And it was at that moment that I realized that this table was not only inclusive, but it counseled together. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I had been trained 1,000,000 times on counseling, and I had never seen it as effective as I saw it at that table, where voices were heard, every opinion. Rabbi Potasnik will look around, and he's looking at everyone, and AR will go, and Tahir will go, I want another one, I want another one, and everyone is heard. Everyone, every voice. So it's the inclusion, Elder Cook, it's the counseling together. And then I think the thing that was most astonishing to me, and it was fresh eyes for me, was the idea of fresh, the fresh lens gave me, which was trusted voices. And that was where you would have the mayor of New York, you would have police commissioner, fire chief, you would have anybody coming in after events that had taken place in New York City, some of them quite tragic, some of them quite complicated, some of them quite confused. What should we do? And to listen to the people around the table, counsel together, and to see these officials who have been elected, who think that the world could revolve around them, pause for a moment and listen to trusted voices. And I knew I was a believer because this was where I felt most at home. It was quite remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, if I may, and this is very important at a time when this generation is making a distinction between spirituality and religion.
Yes.
And they're saying, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Yeah.
And when you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? They don't know how to define it.
That's right.
And it gives us an opportunity to define it for them, to help them through this maze that they're going through in rejection of established religion, which is what they mean by I'm not religious, and understand that we are spiritual by nature.
Yeah.
We have attributes and faculties that are not physical, and religion codifies these attributes into thought, ritual, and practice. How do you take I'm spiritual and codify it? How do you pass it on from one generation to another? How do you apply it within the public square? So we have to really be equipped to challenge their thinking and what pop culture is trying to present to our young people against religion so that they can understand the value that we bring to society as a moral voice.
Well said. Well said. Thank you.
Elder Cook, I want to address one other issue where everyone has really played a very important role, and that is the issue of hatred in our communities. Many of you know about the Tree of Life Synagogue, for example, in Pittsburgh. Rabbi Gerson talked earlier in the panel about a call she received from someone in Nigeria saying, "Are you okay, and where is Pittsburgh?" And I remember Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who's the rabbi of that synagogue, saying to me, and I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, saying to me, "Joe, when we said never again after the Holocaust, did we put a question mark there, or is an exclamation mark there? We'd like to think there was an exclamation mark there, but when we see the proliferation of hatred in society, I'm not sure we have that exclamation mark." But let me tell you what we did do. When there was an attack, for example, in Charlottesville, Christians formed a perimeter, protective perimeter, around the synagogue and said to those hate mongers, "You want them? You got to go through us." When there is a hate symbol placed on any house of worship, whether it was Christ Church in New Zealand, when Muslims were attacked, we came together. In New York, we stood around the Islamic Center of NYU, around St. Patrick's Cathedral, because we know the person who hates me today is going to hate you tomorrow. So we better stand together. So to me, we play an invaluable role. I only wish our newspapers would carry those stories, because as I was saying to Elder Bennett and his wife, if all you know about religion is what you read on the first 3 pages of newspapers, you don't know a lot about religion. So we can be proud of the things we've done as a religious community.
Amen.
That's a great answer. I think that some people think that religious liberty, that they're antithetical, that they don't go together. And you've kind of been answering that, but reflect on that for a minute, will you?
Look, it's interesting in the Declaration of Independence, we talk about liberty. We don't talk about democracy. We talk about liberty. Democracy, sometimes the majority can invalidate the minority. So we got to be careful very often and protect democracy so the minority is protected. And you know that lesson as we Jews know that lesson. Anyone who's been subjected to persecution over the years knows. But liberty means that I have the right not only to practice my faith inside the house of worship and when I leave outside, but I have the right to practice without denigration. Yeah. You can disagree with me, but don't denigrate me. And I think that's one of the tragedies of our times, that people with all kinds of degrees, people who are sophisticated, will look at us and say, "You're arcane, you're old-fashioned." To me, that's a violation of what religious liberty really means. And it also teaches us that education can make us smart, but not necessarily moral. Yeah. So we have to be that part of the equation that inserts morality, so that the faith community takes a stance that shows that we will not back off. We're not going to walk away.
And religious liberty means more than the freedom to worship.
Right.
It means also that I shouldn't have to compromise my core values and beliefs and practices to conform to culture, to conform to government. Yeah. So it's not just the freedom of worship. It means that I can live freely and not be threatened by an ever-changing culture, which sometimes is like fashion, the shifting mood of society. I should not have to compromise those core beliefs. So I think that's an important element of where we are, because we worship got freedom to worship. Right. But now it's encroaching on our core values and our practices and trying to force us to alter what we are, essentially.
Very well said. Now, we've talked a few questions here about our relationship and what it means to be accountable to God, and I think we've handled those very well. I want to move for a minute to doing good in the community. And Reverend Bernard, I want to hear, everybody I talk to tells me how effective you've been at providing food for the poor in this pandemic. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, if you would.
Well, it comes back to partnerships and collaboration. When COVID-19 hit, New York was the epicenter, and we discovered the inequities in our systems, structures, our ability to respond. And we had to then consider how we were going to respond as a church, because for me, church is more than a religious institution, it's a social cultural institution. So we have a responsibility to respond to the needs as they come. This is what we do. So we've been feeding some 25,000 people, but it quickly grew during COVID. And with our partnership with LDS, that was immediately expanding our capacity to now where we're feeding over 120,000 people. And we're looking forward to expanding that even more. And that comes through this kind of partnerships. And it's interesting because some clergy ask me, well, wait a minute, what are you doing partnering with the Mormons? They didn't get the memo. So I said there's something called, when Jesus said that the Father causes his sun to shine on the just and the unjust. He causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust. There's something called common grace. God's love for all of humanity that comes out of God's nature, regardless of religious affiliation. On that basis, we can respond to the life and dignity of the human person in need and the common good. They don't talk to me anymore, but.
Elder Buckner, you've been involved on that from the church's side. Do you want to just say a little bit about that? I brought a couple of photos when we visited, which were precious to me, and maybe we can have you throw them up as you want to in your as you get into this.
It was actually a day that we were at Choral, the Commission of Religious Leaders, and I remember it was I think it was Monsignor Sullivan was talking about the fact that when people have needs, there's a lot of people that stand up and raise their hands when the cameras are there. And I think I remember him saying it's when the cameras leave that so too do the supplies. And I remember stepping aside there and saying, I want to be one with my faith that can be there after the cameras are gone. And we had a conversation, and I said, you said, I have a pantry. I said, well, what are your needs? And we started having that conversation. We recognized manpower, food would be helpful, and the ability to make sure that we reached the community, and it wasn't a one and done, but when the cameras were gone. And so, Elder Cook, there was a partnership that was formed, and Annette Bernard, that works that pantry so miraculously in such amazing fashion, embraced the missionaries to come and help with the manpower part of it. And we have, I think, 12 missionaries that come each over a 2-hour period on a Wednesday and a Thursday, and they're there as manpower to serve 700 families a day that need food, adding up to the number of families that you suggested. And then the needs for food themselves. So in contacting our area presidency, what's available? Elder Bennett going back and saying, well, we can get the resources, we can get the food. So you start with where you've got a partnership. You are where the rubber hits the road. You know the people. You know exactly where it's needed. You know every individual that comes through that line on Wednesday and Thursday. You know them, many of them by name. And what you needed was the partnership, or what you valued was the partnership. We didn't know their names. We didn't know them. But with that, we could offer the partnership of food being delivered, and then the ability to offer some sort of manpower. And that blessing, Elder Cook, has led to, and I don't know if they've got the pictures, but
Let's try and put those up.
that blessing has brought us together.
This, I was there. They got it.
That looks familiar, AR, doesn't it?
Describe that.
This is actually the entrance to our parking lot. And I'll just say the name of our church. It came about after I had an encounter with our illustrious mayor, Edward Koch, good friend of Rabbi Potasnik. And he disbanded the clergy liaison office, but kept 2 representatives, one from the Jewish community and one from the Muslim community. And I challenged him. I said, well, what about the Christians? He said, well, the Jews and the Muslims, Islam and Judaism, it's a religion and it's a culture. Christianity is just a religion. I said, oh. I began to re-examine the impact of Christianity on culture over the 2,000 years of our history. And that's when I said, no, we are a social cultural institution. Yes, religion is the basis, the foundation. It gives our core values and shapes our worldview. But essentially, we are an institution that's here to respond to the needs of society. So I spent 10 years from 1989, that happened in 85, 1989 to 1999, teaching my congregation who we are and what we were about to engage in. And it was in 2000 that we changed the name to Christian Cultural Center. In 1989, we had 625 members. We grew from 625 to 11,000 in 99, and from 99 to now, we've grown to 45,000 members. But it's because they understood that it wasn't just a Sunday worship and religious activity. We have a role to play as the hands of God, as Bishop Brown said, the heart of God, the eyes of God, the hands of God, the feet of God within society. So that drives my congregation and their understanding of their place in society.
And it's also,
Go ahead, you go.
It's also seeing houses of worship. We need to start thinking as ourselves as churches without walls. Because if we can look at ourselves as churches without walls, then perhaps we can see the community. We can see the community, we can see the needs, and we can begin to intentionally meet those needs. And what happened in one time in our particular district, to Dr. Bernard's point, our crime rate, our gun violence rate went up we were leading in gun violence in our particular district. And it took all of us coming together, from our Sikhs to our Muslims to our Christians and rabbis, coming together to talk about what is it we need to do collectively as an interfaith body to address this issue. We had to first think of ourselves as churches without walls and begin the movement to see our community healed. And to this day, we no longer lead in gun violence. Although we have a gun violence issue in our city, our particular area does not lead, because we made a decision that we're going to tear down our walls and begin to intentionally meet the needs of our community. That's the effectiveness of becoming
And
that.
collaboration becomes the norm, not the surprise.
Right. And what I wanted everybody to
Yes.
understand is that because this was all in place, then a partnership on a piece of it, helping with some food, could come in. Let's just show that second picture, if we could. This is a truck from here bringing some food, and let's go to the next one, and the people unloading it there. And let's go to the third one there if we can. This is the hero. She said, Annette, will you stand up?
Come on, Annette.
Will you stand up? If you talk to our missionaries who are involved in helping with this, they just adore Annette, and she gets it done. She's a doer, and with such a smile on her face. So we're grateful. So we think that this historically has been it, but we've been able to help some. That's how we see that. So.
If I could add something about Mayor Ed Koch, who removed that Christian liaison. Ed Koch is buried on the grounds of Trinity Church in New York City, uptown. So I guess to you he repented. But let me add something about, LDS. You not only helped this community. I remember Elder Buckner coming to my office with blank checks. And he said, I want you to name for me organizations that do great work in feeding the poor. And I named, I think it was 5 of them. And you wrote checks to all 5. Checks that cleared. And I read something just last night that I think is so illuminating. University of Toronto tried this experiment. They divided people into 2 groups. To one group, they gave dark glasses. To the other group, they gave glasses where you could see one another. And then they gave each group money. They said, you give out money to those you think need it, and if you want, keep some for yourself. What do you think happened? The ones with the dark glasses kept some money, gave some out, but kept some. The ones who had those other glasses, the see-through, whatever you want to call them, they gave it all away because they recognized that people were looking. We're accountable. And where we're accountable, we act in a certain way. So thank you, LDS, for not distinguishing between the Christian poor and the Muslim poor and the Jewish poor, for seeing all humans as having that same spiritual birth certificate and belonging to one family.
Thank you, Rabbi. Let me put this a little in perspective. Elder Buckner doesn't go around giving everybody blank checks.
I learned that too. I learned that too.
But President Nelson, our prophet, had asked across this whole country to find 200 places in honor of our 200th anniversary that we could do some good. And he gave that responsibility to area presidencies. We have Randall Bennett here with us. Stand up, Randall. He's the president of the North American Northeast. And he trusted Elder Buckner enough, and we have had a long relationship with Rabbi Potasnik, that he came in with those blank checks. I just want to make it clear that we're not running around with blank checks.
Elder Cook, I was mentioning that it's no longer a surprise, but the norm. So before coming here, a police detective, Muslim, Mohammed Amen, calls me because a friend of his, a Christian bishop's church caught on fire, and the Muslim mission raised money, and he asked if I would join in. So I'll be there on Monday to look at the damage, and we're bringing in our construction crew to remedy the damage that was done by the fire. So it's become natural to us in our community to interact like this and call upon one another whenever there's a need to be responded to.
And that's why LDS, and I have to say this, that's why LDS will always be blessed, because the power of the seeds you sow are the seeds you grow. And you'll never have a lack because of how much seed that you have put in the ground. So thank you again.
Elder Cook, years ago, I was invited to the installation of Archbishop Edwin O'Brien. And the ceremony was at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And I went there, and I was sent 2 tickets. As I was prepared to enter the cathedral, there was an elderly woman who wanted to enter, but she didn't have a ticket. So I said to her, I have an extra one. Here, take mine. She said, who are you? I said, no, Rabbi here in New York City. She looked at me, she said, only in New York. For a Catholic to get into St. Patrick's Cathedral, do you need a rabbi to give you a ticket? And I tell you that story because that's what choral, that's what we're all about. It's about opening doors for one another so someone else can enter. And I think we should be proud of that record and continue on that path. We can walk on separate paths to our respective houses of worship, but there comes that moment when all of us know we have to walk on that path of humanity together as one family.
Amen.
Reverend English, you've been seen as one who believes in trusted voices. Now, that was mentioned earlier. I'd like to have you describe that just a little bit more for us.
Absolutely. Trusted voices, trusted messengers. There's messenger, and then there's trusted messenger, right? And so when you think of trusted messenger, it really falls in several categories. One, messenger that identifies with the pain that person, that victim, that person that's coming out of prison is going through. We call those credible messengers. In my life, because I identify with the pain of a lot of the ills that I see in society, from having brothers and sisters addicted, whether it's opioid or any other type of drugs or alcohol, seeing my immediate family, HIV/AIDS, you watching my brother push the shopping cart down the street, personal issues from mental illness to substance use disorder to other types of egregious acts that took place in the family. I think one of the most dangerous things that we lived by growing up was what goes on in the house stays in the house. And some of the things that we went through needed to come out of the house, and it didn't. And if we had allowed it to come out of the house, perhaps we would have been in a better position. And so when you think of trusted messengers, many times it's those that can identify with what the other has gone through. What makes us trusted is that we show up after the camera is off. What makes us trusted is that we are people of our word, where our word is stronger than a handshake, stronger than a pen on a piece of paper, our word. Because they don't want to hear how much we care until we show them how much we care. When I think about those youth that we're serving today, and those youth that are going through such challenging times, they have lived with broken promises all of their lives. Whether it's the absentee father, whether it's the angry mother, whether it's the bullying that's taken place, to gain their trust, it can't be transactional, it's relational. We have to learn that in order to be a trusted messenger, we have to invest. We have to develop relationship, one person at a time. We have to be there when it's time for them to go to court, or take them to get clothes after school, or come and provide a meal when they're hungry. And while they're hungry, a lot of times, I've seen this, even in my own religion, we want to come and preach to them, but they're hungry. Give them some food. And when we begin to take those intentional steps of showing them why they can trust us, you'll find out they'll reach out to you before they will anyone else. They'll pick up that phone to disclose what they're going through. Why? Because we've become trusted messengers in their lives. So becoming relational, showing up after a march, showing up after a press conference, showing up after the handshake, being in their lives when the lights are off makes you a trusted messenger.
That's the difference. That's the difference between a contract and a covenant. Contract is transactional. After the terms are fulfilled, the contract is over. A covenant, as we said before we were talking, is binding. It's a relationship. We have a covenant with God, we have a covenant with one another, and that is our responsibility to fulfill. And even when we violate it, it still is in existence. It still has to be enforced.
And it's recognizing and using our moral influence.
That's it.
Young lady, struggling, single parent, Haitian woman, and in order to get ahead, she has 2 daughters, she takes on a job at McDonald's, working nights. She gets a supervisory position, 15% pay increase, the differential, and she's trying to give her children a better quality of life. So she goes to work, she leaves her children home. She has no child care. She's taking a risk in order to give them a better quality of life. Her estranged husband comes, thinking she's there with the children. He sets the house on fire. The fire consumes the house, the children die. And Charles Hines was the prosecutor,
District attorney.
District attorney at the time. Now he's compelled to put her in prison for negligence. We now come in with a balance of grace and truth, all right, because there was a degree of negligence, and we say, no, let's address this differently. We were able to get the charges against her dropped and funeralize the children. But then it inspired us to introduce in a $1.2 billion affordable housing development project that we're shovels in the ground next year. I wish it was next week. Next year, we are creating a 24/7 child care. And if you understand, that means investigating new laws, new policies, because most child care in the country covers only a 12-hour period, usually 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening. So we're pioneering this whole new realm to change policy and legislation in order to meet the needs of this young woman. And she represents many, many women who are single parent and struggling like this to get ahead and don't have the support that they need. This is the power of the church, to step in to situations like this.
Thank you.
And you're a trusted messenger in that space, right? And it was the same thing that happened. I used to run an organization called the Bronx Clergy Criminal Justice Roundtable. They're all probationers. And this young man was about to be sentenced to jail. And because we showed up in court, right? He was able to get a lighter sentence where it was actually put under our care. And they said, if you oversee him, we're going to trust you to take care of this individual because we don't want to see him in our courts anymore. And from that day forward, he never entered into a court. Instead, went to school, finished his trade school, and ended up working for the Department of Probation, the very system that had him on probation. So the power of trusted messenger, and that's who we are in this room, but us collectively can do more together.
Rabbi, thank you. Appreciate that very much. You've said a little bit about this, but how can leaders work collaboratively and without compromising their own personal faith? You've done that very well. Would you care to start off talking about that a little bit?
When we walk into a house of worship, Jewish house of worship, there's an inscription very often over the ark, which says in Hebrew, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. And that says to all of us that yes, we are accountable. We're accountable for our behavior. And therefore, we have to stand strong in what we believe is right. We have different forms of worship. We have different practices, but there is no reason why. What does your tradition say? There are many rooms in my house, right? There's enough place in our society for all of us to practice freely, right? Without compromise. Yes, those of you who are married here, you know compromise is essential. But, as a matter of fact, you know when you walk into a Jewish home, a mezuzah, you know a mezuzah? You have a mezuzah in Salt Lake City? You have one or two here, right? It's in a slanted position because there was an argument as to how should we put there. One school said this way, the other school said no, it's got to be this way. They compromised. And the mezuzah is slanted. That's because to teach you importance of concessions in every human relationship. But when it comes to religious conviction, you shouldn't have to compromise. You should be able to be proud. I've often said we need, in our faith, proud Judaism. I want my son to be proud. I always tell him, as my father told me, I don't care what kind of Jew you become. Just be proud of the Jew that you become. So I think if all of us will remember that we are accountable and we are expected to be exemplars of religious conviction, then we shouldn't have to compromise with who we are. There's a place for compromise in the arena, but I think in the religious arena, we can all be next to one another with our differences. And one day, when the Messiah comes, or when the Messiah comes again, I know, I'm not looking to, I know the crowd here. But one day, you know, many of those issues that divided us will be resolved. And I have a feeling, as Ed Koch said, that the Messiah will say, you're right, and you're right. You were both right. because you were sincere and you were serious in your religious commitment.
And using our platforms, because every Sunday morning from 7:30 to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard.
7 to 8.
On
You
WABC.
changed the time and I didn't know. We have, whether it's mayor, governor, experts come on our program, and we tackle the issues, and we weigh in from a religious and moral perspective. And then at the end of the show, we have a conversation about the conversation. And there are times where we disagree in terms of our religious tradition. Sure. And we have fun disagreeing. And I gave Rabbi the right to be wrong as often as he is. And so we close the program in a way that we still have this relationship. So we're modeling civil discourse, even when there's disagreement on major issues based upon our faith tradition.
I get a call in the car very often from Reverend Bernard saying, I'm looking at chapter 3, verse 15 in Genesis. Tell me what Jewish tradition, what do the commentators say about it? And I think my parents looking down saying, let me understand, you have a Christian minister calling you to explain Jewish tradition. America is a great country. And I really think that the fact that we can have this dialogue, disagreement, we can look at texts and have serious disagreements. You know what we say in the Jewish world? The Jewish star is the best symbol for the Jewish nation. Why? Because you have two triangles going in opposite directions. And very often we are in conflict with one another on a number of issues, but we're all on the same flag. So I welcome those the disagreement is a test of a relationship. If all of us agree on the same thing, it doesn't really test the depth of the relationship. It's when you disagree and you can still reach out and say, I love you. Now you have a relationship.
You've found several ways to try and let leaders know how you feel about religious things. The one that you mentioned where you all signed a letter. I'm amazed at the way you're getting them on your radio program and having a chance to talk to them in that kind of way. Are there formal addresses that you make? Is it a specific issue? Are there formal recommendations that you make to governmental leaders?
We had a demonstration outside of the court, the state Supreme Court in Manhattan, on about Rikers Island, about a prison where we visited Rikers, and I have to say, it is a shameful, shameful sight. It's inhumane. And what we said is, you can't, people should face consequences. There is a fitting punishment, but there is no excuse for this place. And we came together, the Cardinal and all other religious leaders came together and say, we protest what's going on, and we very much want to see a change, opening up other prisons and other localities. Also, when it came to the homeless issue, we came together with the Safe Havens Initiative, and we said, as Mayor Adams said, there's no dignity in sleeping on the street. We have to provide not only a shelter, but a shelter with supportive services. So we are working with government to say, as a matter of fact, the Commissioner of the Homeless is a member of Christian Cultural Center. But we are working with government officials to say, let's find solid solutions. We can't just raise the questions, we got to find the answers. But we can only do that in listening and learning from one another.
And often there are things that happen in the background. I worked with Mayor Michael Bloomberg for the 12 years that he was in office. Rabbi also. I served on the Economic Development Corporation Board. But there was one particular incident where there was a shooting of a young man named Sean Bell. He was in a club and then left the club in a car. 5 police officers emptied their weapons, reload on this young man because there was a report of a gun. Yeah. It was excessive force. So we gather, and this is a powder keg. There have been quite a few powder kegs in the city, but this one was about to erupt because you also had community leaders with their own agendas who wanted to exploit an explosion. So we had a meeting with community leaders. In fact, Al Sharpton was in that meeting. And then you had some radical individuals who were there. So it was Commissioner Kelly on my right, and Mayor Bloomberg on my left. I was there. And so we're talking about how we're going to respond. And the other side was demanding that the mayor take radical action before an investigation, just radical action. So I leaned over and I said, Mr. Mayor, you're going to have to let the commissioner take the heat on this, but you're going to need to make a visceral remark, a response to the press, because we're about to go out to a press conference. And I said, that's the only way you're going to diffuse this. And he looked at me, a trusted voice.
Right.
So we leave the room, we go out to the press, and the mayor says, I think that this was the use of excessive force, but this is an ongoing investigation, and we'll see how it turns out. For 2 weeks, the media blasted the mayor for making that statement. And then after that 2-week period, he was a hero because the explosion didn't take place the way it would have on the ground. So on the inside, because we're trusted voices, because we have that influence, we're using it behind the scenes where you don't know, because certain things don't happen because we were there.
What a wonderful example of religious voices calming extremes, which is a very wonderful thing to do. Elder Buckner, you mentioned to me that one of the things that surprised you the most when you came on board here was that instead of the various members seeking for government to give them things, that there was a basic concept of what can we do to help. Would you kind of reflect on that?
It's fascinating because as you sit at this table, and any given time that we meet, there's probably 8 to 10, maybe 12 people maximum at this table. And as they're seated around, first of all, with these trusted voices, the power of this is that you don't have to have the same opinion. And you don't have to sign on or show up. If for any reason something doesn't align perfectly, you're not out, you're not pushed out. There's a power in unity, but there's a respect for individuality.
Good.
The second part of this is, and it was interesting, it was a time in which we were talking about many people come to the table want. And I don't remember what the conversation might have been. But I remember distinctly that as the guests had left, whether it was the cardinal or whether it was you, Reverend Bernard, that you had made the comment that so many people come to the table asking. And those that are seated around this table come saying, what can I give? And it's a completely different model for what you might think when you're dealing with government. Where when government's there, the first thing you might want to do is, okay, so what can we exact in this one moment we have with the commissioner? What can we exact in this 1 hour we have with the mayor? You don't hear that. Every single conversation is, Mayor, what do you need? How can we give voice to this? Where is it most appropriate for a religious, trusted voice to give comfort? And it elevates the conversation every time. It moves it away from the tactical, transactional, religious engagement and moves it up to a higher level of purpose. And that's the experience that I've seen.
After Hurricane Sandy, members of LDS didn't wait for government to come in with all kinds of support. You were on the front lines. You were there helping families. You know, Elie Wiesel years ago said, when you're born, you begin life. But there comes a time you have to learn how to begin again. And here were families who faced this devastation, seeing their homes destroyed. And all of a sudden, people with yellow jackets, right, penetrated the areas, went around knocking on doors. People, you know, New York was sometimes reluctant to open doors. And what was the response? What can we do to help you? You have no idea what impression that made. 9/11, I was there. And I remember, once again, LDS and so many other faith communities who came together. I was in Poland a few weeks ago on the Ukrainian-Poland border. You would be proud of the faith communities that stood next to one another, welcoming the refugees, not asking what can we do, but what else can we do? Because there are people who do nothing and say, well, what can I do? And there are those who do so much and say, well, what else could I do? Yeah. And to see your church, to see all the other churches and all the other, denominations standing and saying, we belong to one another. We're no good if we're detached, as they used to say on a ticket years ago. If you detach it, it's no good. We're no good if we're detached from one another. You be proud, stand proud of all that you have done, and don't think it hasn't been recognized by all of those whom you helped. As a matter of fact, when you look at Jewish tradition, the Talmud begins not on page 1, but on page 2. It begins on page 2. My family came to this country after that devastation, losing children, and they began on page 2. So all of us really have to be there for one another to help those when page 1 is ripped away from them and say, we're going to help you write page 2.
Again. And the shared values also, the balance of grace and truth, because we believe in giving people a hand up as well as a hand out. The scripture says that God gives seed to the sower. That's for industry. That's for someone who has the capacity to do something. But also bread to the eater. It's the person who doesn't have the capacity to help themselves. And we need both of those things coming together. So it's great to know that those shared values allow us to partner the way we do.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you one final question. What advice would you have for religious leaders in other cities in trying to make an interfaith council work?
You have the talent, you have the people. It's easy to replicate. When you have a belief system that is strong and you don't back off, you don't run, I think you can inspire a lot of people, and government will listen to you. Government will listen to you because they know that you reach people. So I think the need is there, the people are there, you just need the effort. If I could leave you with this final thought. Many of you remember the magazine called Life? Sure. After Life, there was a magazine called People. After People, there was a magazine called Us. After Us, there was a magazine called Self. We started with Life, we finished with Self. But we Jews read from right to left. So you can start with Self, but as you know, it's all about all of us as one people trying to make life as meaningful as possible for all people. Coral was one example. You can create many others in your communities. Thank you so much for this honor.
Thank you.
So when you just survey the ills of society, for me, I've worked in human trafficking, domestic violence, and then we're partnering together, tackling maternal mortality and severe morbidity, because the U.S. has the highest maternal mortality rate than any other developed country in the world, with African American women and Native American women lead with a 3 to 4 times higher maternal mortality rate than their counterparts. You look at suicide. Last year, the United States emergency rooms had an increase of over 51% in suicide, particularly among adolescents 12 to 17 years old. You look at mental health in youth, which was declared a national emergency last year. It was already an emergency pre-pandemic, and now even more so now. Mental health has been on the rise as a result of the pandemic. And it's not just mental health with our congregation, the mental health with us as leaders, while we're actually leading many times while bleeding. I'm saying all of that when you think about the needs. It's right before us. When we think about the importance of creating interfaith counsel, what saddens you is what you're assigned to heal. What angers you is what you're assigned to solve. We have so many issues before us. So we have to look past religion, focus on humanity and the needs, and lead from a position of empathy. And when you focus just on that what can I do to help my brother, to help my neighbor? whether they look like me, whether they worship like me, you know, whether they're the same socioeconomic means as me, it doesn't matter. When you look at the ills and the issues that's before you, that's when you can be proactive. And the last thing I want to say as it relates to government, I serve in government and I am shocked about how many government offices do not have an interfaith table. I want to encourage you in your own respective cities and states to look at ways to be a bridge builder in your mayor's office, in your governor's office, and begin to have conversations on the need of them consulting you on the issues that's plaguing your respective city. So as my brother said, thank you for the opportunity for me to share with you today as well.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you. You've all been spectacular. Thank you so much. On behalf of BYU International Center for Law and Religious Studies and this Religious Freedom Annual Conference, I express appreciation for your significant participation on this panel and congratulate you for the excellent religious leadership you are providing to New York City. I believe it is an excellent example for many places in this and other countries. You have our love and our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amazing.